Fuse. So simple and yet so complicated. There are so many possible combinations, it's easy to miss some good ones. In my last Fuse video, I gave you 9 Fuse combos that were interesting, useful, and easy to miss. And in this video, I'm going to give you 11 more to make it an even 20. Alright, let's jump into the video. Number 1. Octoballoon Arrows. In my last video, I showcased the usefulness of fusing an octoballoon with your shield. But what about arrows? When I first attempted this fusion, I was really hoping that these arrows would attach octoballoons to enemies to lift them into the sky and make them easy targets. But when I tried it out, the balloons just popped on impact. So I thought that was the end of it. But then, I remembered that the main way people used octoballoons in Breath of the Wild was to lift up various overworld objects. So I fused another octoballoon to my arrow and fired it at a log. And lo and behold, the octoballoon attached to the log and began to lift it into the air. Unfortunately, this doesn't seem to work with multi-shot bows, so just keep that in mind. Now, the uses for this fuse combo are pretty niche, but imagine you are approaching an enemy camp, and you see that they have some bomb barrels. You can fire an octoballoon arrow at one of the barrels to lift it into the air. When the balloon pops, the barrel drops and explodes, sending enemies flying. Are there easier ways to do this? Sure. But it's another tool in your arsenal. Plus, since octoballoons are not Zonai devices, you can use them from your inventory inside shrines, so there's probably some shrine where you can use this fusion to reach the end in a more unconventional way. Number 2. Cannon Weapons. Cannons are one of the coolest Zonai devices in Tears of the Kingdom. Fusing them with your weapons allows you to fling cannonballs at enemies, which is super cool. But it's kind of difficult to hit what you are aiming for. Or so I thought. Shout out to these commenters on my last Fuse video who let me know that you can precisely aim your shots by using R like you do when you throw weapons, or fire energy beams from the Master Sword. Many people mentioned fusing the cannon to a spear, but this actually works with any cannon weapon. Cannon weapons can be pretty useful for fighting Taluses, especially when their weak point is in an awkward spot, and they can put in a lot of work on the massive ore deposits you find in caves. They also have a really good range, allowing you to attack enemies from a great enough distance that the enemies aren't even alerted to your presence. You know, other than the fiery cannonballs raining down on them. Number 3. Spring Shield. Another great Zonai device for fusions is the spring. Specifically, I really like fusing a spring to a shield. Much like bomb shields, shield surfing on a spring shield allows you to get some height, and both the bomb shield and the spring shield are also good at sending enemies flying when you are using the shield for defense. However, the spring shield has a major advantage. Whereas the bomb on a bomb shield only gets one usage ever, when using the spring shield for defense, the spring is not automatically used up. It does still disappear if you use it to get height, but you get to send enemies flying multiple times with the same spring, which makes it quite a bit more practical for combat. Number 4. Forest Dwellers Weapons. A lot of the fuse combos in my last video were really focused on the material being fused to weapons, shields, and arrows. However, many of you pointed out that there were a number of great fusions that were specific to certain base weapons. One example is the Forest Dwellers weapons, which come with the passive ability Fuse Recycle. This ability allows you to attach items that burst to the weapons so that once they are used up, they are regenerated without you having to attach a new one. As far as I could tell, the only bursting items are the elemental fruits, chew jellies, bright bloom seeds, muddle buds, dazzle fruit, and puff shrooms. Most of these are pretty useful for a variety of reasons. Fire fruit, ice fruit, and shock fruit are good fusions because elemental effects are pretty useful in general. Unfortunately, I don't think the same can be said for chew jellies, because their area of effect is actually too large, which means that you will frequently get caught in the elemental blast coming from your weapon. Bright bloom seeds are super useful for exploring the depths, because you can get way more mileage out of a single bright bloom seed. This is especially true for the giant variety of the bright bloom seeds, which are more rare. Muddle buds are incredible because they make your enemies fight each other. And dazzle fruit are really useful for staggering enemies, especially in a large group. Also, fun fact, dazzle fruit instantly kill all stall enemies in the area, with the exception of the Stallnox, so that can be very helpful as well. Finally, Puff Shrooms are extremely useful as they allow you to essentially get guaranteed sneak strikes on almost any enemy. Number 5. Elemental Wind Blades. Another great weapon base for fusions is the 8-fold Longblade, especially when combined with elemental materials. The 8-fold Longblade has the passive ability Wind Razor, which sends out a blade of wind that damages enemies when you attack. But when you combine this with specific elemental materials, this will instead produce an elemental blade of wind corresponding to the attached material. Now, this is cool, but I actually think there's an even better set of weapons with a very similar ability: the Feathered Edge and the Feathered Spear. Both of these weapons come with the passive ability Wind Burst. Unlike Wind Razor, which sends out wind that damages the enemy, Wind Burst sends out a gust of wind that knocks enemies back. Combining a Feathered Edge or Spear with the right elemental materials doesn't produce an elemental gust of wind, but it does produce both the elemental effect and the gust of wind separately. The reason I think this is better is because it works really well with ice materials. You can freeze an enemy, and then the gust of wind sends their frozen body sliding away, which is helpful near cliffs and water. For both the 8-fold Longblade and the feathered weapons, one last thing to note is that their passive abilities are only preserved if you fuse them with blade-type materials, so pay attention to which elemental materials work. A Frost Lizalfos horn, for instance, will preserve the base weapon's ability, whereas an ice-like stone will not. Number 6. Shock-resistant shields. One of the most annoying aspects of combat in Tears of the Kingdom is fighting against electric enemies. Getting shocked not only deals extra damage, but causes you to drop whatever items you are currently holding. Theoretically, you can use a shield to block electric attacks, but unfortunately, metal shields, which typically are able to take a beating, are not viable for blocking electric attacks due to their conductive nature. Or are they? Thanks to Fuse, you can now give your metal shields the ability to resist electricity. The great thing is that there are tons of materials that this works with. In my testing, essentially any material that you would typically expect to be a non-conductive material works to block electric attacks. Do note, though, that metal shields will still attract lightning, so you will still want to change shields in a thunderstorm. Number 7. Zonai Emitter Boomerangs. Boomerangs are one of the more unique weapons in Tears of the Kingdom. While you can still use boomerangs for hand-to-hand combat, what sets them apart is their ability to return to you after being thrown. Like, boomerang. Anyway, one really interesting way to make use of a boomerang's unique capabilities is to fuse it with one of the 4 Zonai emitter devices: the flame emitter, the frost emitter, the shock emitter, or the beam emitter. By throwing a boomerang with one of these Zonai devices attached, you can hit a group of enemies with an elemental effect without having to actually hit the enemies, which is nice because aiming the boomerang takes a bit of practice to get right. There are other materials that can be fun to attach to boomerangs, but I think these Zonai emitters are the most useful. Number 8. Honeycomb Weapons and Arrows. Did you know that you can send forth a horde of bees to attack your enemies? By fusing a weapon or arrow with coarser bee honey, you can create honeycomb weapons and arrows that will summon bees when used. This isn't a crazy helpful fusion, but it is a neat little effect that the developers didn't have to include, and it is funny to watch enemies flail around to ward off the bees, even if it doesn't deal massive damage. Number 9. Stake Arrows. In my last video, I talked about the usefulness of Hoverstone arrows. Another fuse combo that fills a similar role is Stake Arrows. You can fuse a Zonai stake with an arrow, and when fired, it will stick into any surface where you could normally place a stake. This can come in handy when you are, say, climbing a cliff and need to create a resting point before finishing your climb. Generally speaking, I would say that Hoverstone arrows are still more useful and serve the same purpose. But stake arrows are a good backup if you are out of hoverstones or need to be able to stand without worrying about battery usage. Number 10. Surfing Shields. One of the best features in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is the ability to surf on your shield. In Tears of the Kingdom, this feature was made even cooler by giving you the ability to fuse items to your shield. and by the ability to rail grind. There have been many videos about the best items to fuse to your shield for shield surfing, but they are so useful that I decided to cover them here anyway, just in case you missed some of them. Zonai carts and mine carts are good materials, as they essentially turn your shield into a skateboard, which works well for most surfaces. A Zonai sled also works well, but is better suited for use in the sand or on snow. Finally, Icy Meat is probably the best fusion overall, as it reduces the amount of friction between your shield and the ground to almost zero. This does make it harder to control sometimes, but it is very fast, and you can often go further with Icy Meat than you can with other fuse materials. It should be noted, however, that this doesn't work well in hot areas, as the Icy Meat will actually thaw. But then the other fuse combos mentioned previously are good alternatives. Number 11. Ice Weapons. Do you miss Cryonis? I didn't realize how tedious it can be to cross some bodies of water in Hyrule, until I could no longer make Cryonis blocks to cross without swimming. Fortunately, there is a solution. Ice. You can create ice sheets by throwing an ice elemental material into water. By fusing one of these ice sheets to a weapon, spears tend to work best, you can then create more ice sheets in the water just by attacking with your weapon. The ice on your weapon does thaw, but as long as there is another ice sheet nearby, you can just fuse one of those to your weapon again. It's a really nice trick that makes the lack of Cryonis hurt just a little bit less. How many of these fusions did you know about? Are there any more fusions that I should have included? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, as I am continuing to research and make more videos about Tears of the Kingdom. I have a couple cool video ideas coming up that I'm really excited for, and that you won't want to miss. Finally, I'm going to be doing a giveaway of Tears of the Kingdom to celebrate reaching 1,000 subscribers, so keep your eyes peeled for a formal announcement on that soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. God bless.